Welcome to episode 68 of the Sports Geek podcast. On this week's podcast, I catch up with Finn Bradshaw from Cricket Australia with their new digital offerings for the summer ahead and talk to him about what he's learnt 1 year in the job as head of digital for Cricket Australia.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who is actually taller and younger on the internet, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel, and thank you for listening and downloading another episode of the Sports Geek podcast. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and you're either listening to this on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or even perhaps Audio Boom. Thank you for listening. We've got a cricketing guest today, Finn Bradshaw, Head of Digital from Cricket Australia. We chat a lot about his role prior to Cricket Australia, working for News Corporation and then coming across to Cricket Australia in the past year and what he's learnt 1 year on the job after a big summer of Ashes cricket. And actually on the podcast, we're in the nervous 90s. It's a term, it's a cricketing term. The milestone of 100 runs is a big milestone in cricket, and that's what most batsmen will try to achieve. And yes, this is Finn is guest 93. So I'm in the nervous 90s, edging closer to the 100th guest. Haven't decided who that will be. I'm not going to plan anyone big. We'll just see who becomes guest 100. Like always, you can find the show notes to this episode and all episodes just by simply putting the show number, the episode number, at the end of Sportsgeek HQ /68 in this case. So this is a really long interview, so I'm going to be very quick off the top here. Don't forget, you can grab the lookbook. Premier League lookbook version is out at the moment. Get all the Premier League websites in one handy PDF. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/lookbook. It's free for a short time for people who sign up for the lookbook and for people who are on the Sports Geek news email list. You'll get them, and always get them free. If you've missed out on the NFL lookbook, you can download that. And if you use the code podcast, there you go. I'm not being overly inventive. If you use the code podcast, you don't have to pay to get the back catalogue of the NFL lookbook. Had a lot of people downloading it, and thank you very much for the feedback. If you're a new listener, please send me out a tweet at Sean Callanan or at Sportsgeek, or even send me a connection on LinkedIn. Thank you very much, Kaylee, for sending me a LinkedIn invite and saying that you're a listener to the podcast. Very much appreciate it. So I'm going to get stuck right into my discussion with Finn, but stay tuned after the interview for Sounds of the Game from the Four Nations final over in Wellington, and also I'll be talking a little bit about what I'm planning for next July prior to SEAT Conference next year in San Francisco. But first, here's Finn Bradshaw from Cricket Australia on what we can expect for the summer ahead. Here I am at Cricket Australia head office in, I think, what is best termed a man cave, or at least a digital man cave, here with the head of digital, Finn Bradshaw. Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, Finn.
Pleasure to be here, Sean. Long-time listener, first-time attendee.
Yes, and one of the, I guess, a story from when we met, even though we're both based in Melbourne, the first time we met was actually on my first Sports Geek trip in New York.
And on my honeymoon.
On your honeymoon, yeah. Like I'm travelling around, finally get to New York. We're tweeting backwards and forwards, realise we're both in the same town. And I think we ended up watching the NFL playoffs in some bar. I don't know where it was.
The bar, I can't think what it's called. Southern Hospitality, owned by JT, Justin Timberlake.
Oh, Justin Timberlake's bar,
one of the
that's
many
right.
owners.
And yeah, it was Brett Favre as a Viking versus the Jets. So we hadn't met. I was actually wearing my new New York Knicks Sports Geek jersey, so that's how you recognised me when I walked in the bar. So that's a long time ago. Back at that stage, you were working. Going a bit of background of before you got to Cricket Australia, you were working for News Corp for the Herald Sun and all their things online. You want to take us a little bit of back to that time and what you were doing with News Corp at that stage?
Yeah, so 2010, I'd been there for about 2 years. I came across in 2008 to pretty much set up Super Footy, which was their national AFL network. It was essentially driven out of the Herald Sun, but the same content was replicated across their other sites. I'd been at the AFL website for about 10 months before that. And so I came back and, one of the things that you sort of never quite prepare yourself for, that when you walk in the door of a building like the Herald Sun Sports Department, in those days, you sort of, almost, had to pinch myself. I'd been a journalism student, always loved sport. And, there was a place that just really, really cared about being the best, but they hadn't cared about being the best online.
Yep.
So, the online department there was kind of a bit of the freaks and geeks. It was sort of a lot of blokes on special project leave sort of down there. And, I was one of the first people that I think they hired specifically for their digital experience. Not that I'd had an enormous digital experience, but I'd had some. And also just with a remit of, try and get this thing up and running. So for the first, I reckon, 2 years there, it was pretty much me and a few casuals. So it was, you jump from writing a news yarn to doing a live chat around the teams to doing a video with Mike Sheehan to, and so for me it was a real crash course into what worked, what didn't, because we were so light on for resources, you couldn't mess around with stuff that wasn't working. And the other thing, AFL is just in Australia, it's an amazing area to trial stuff because people are so passionate. So one, if it works, it takes off. You don't, you know very quickly whether it's working or not. And people are so passionate that they also tell you if you're getting it wrong. So it was sort of a real crucible. And, after a couple of years, it was sort of self-evident that what we're doing was working, and I was maybe able to spring through a few more resources to actually sort of lift it to where it is today, which I think is still a really great product.
And it's quite strange. Like, we're talking, 2010, 2011, and it was still very old school. You had a lot of, rusted on old school journos, Mike Sheehan, a doyen, if you want to throw that word out. And then guys like Mark Robinson and John Ralph, all those kind of guys, they were really rallying against the rise of social and the fact that, all these fans were having a say. I remember having, lunch with you after we'd caught up in New York and saying, you've got to get these guys on Twitter. That's where the pulse of it is. And there was that real resistance to them. Oh, we don't want to do that. They should be reading our columns. And then the light bulb started going off with one or two of them to start seeing, I guess, the power of digital and the fact that they could get their stories out and really feel the pulse of the fans just by sending out a tweet every now and again.
I still remember when I did a pre-season presentation to the Herald Sun Sports Department about Twitter, and I wish I could remember what year it was, but I'd say it was probably the start of 2009, maybe start of 2010, probably start of 2009, and said, this thing's really quite amazing, you should get on there. And they'll, there's still a bit of eye rolling about that because, also a lot of people come past and said, oh, MySpace, you should get on MySpace, so there's reasonable cynicism around it. And then I started talking about Bill Simmons, and, Bill Simmons then had, I think, 1 million Twitter followers. Now, what is he, however many he is, and, he's a god of sports journalism. But, then, and I said, so, he'd just recently redone his deal with ESPN. And so I said, if he's in the marketplace for a new deal, do you reckon having 1 million followers is going to help that? And that, I reckon, had a light bulb moment to get people on there. Now, I've always, because I've worked with them and I worked with the Daily Taylor journos, and for some people, it's just not them. Like, you've got to have a thick skin.
Yep.
Like, if you looked at the mentions that those guys cop, it's just horrendous. There's just a lot of idiots out there. But for reporting, there's no better platform. And, I think for those guys building their brand, like the guys like John Ralph, Jay Clark, Sam Edmund, there's no doubt that sort of, I reckon, helped elevate them quicker than the old school process where they would have still been getting their sort of second, third stories because the top dogs tend to get the best pick. But, Twitter helps them have a bit of a following quicker, so then they pick up radio gigs and they start to expand their profile.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. It's the same offering that athletes have. You can, if you've got an original point of view and you've got an original take on things, people follow you and engage with you. Yeah, the troll issue is always going to be an issue. I think Twitter is improving that in improving the experience for with verified accounts and the fact you only see people you follow and little things like that. But yeah, Simmons Simmons laughs that he never actually looks at his mentions ever. Like he just goes, why would I want to do that? But it was really important, I think, to help accelerate digital overall, just to seeing those guys participate in that discussion. So you're at News for a couple of years, heading up Super Footy. Last year, take us back to your move last year at the start of summer. It would have been around this time.
It was just a bit over a year ago. It was middle of October. They started here, which was about a month out from the Ashes starting. Australia. So
for the people who are listening who aren't in England, the Ashes is when Australia and England do battle in a Test series in cricket, and it's eons old. It's hundreds of years where they're battling for a tiny little urn of ashes. It seems insignificant, but it's one of the biggest sporting trophies, from a significance point of view in Australian sports history. And Australia had how many? We'd been belted a couple of times in a row from the English.
I think we maybe lost 3 series in a row, which is pretty rare, probably for either side to lose that many in a row, but especially not Australia over the last 30 years. It's kind of like having a Red Sox-Yankees World Series scheduled every 18 months.
Exactly, and for 6 weeks running.
That's
and
right, yeah.
So England were out in Australia for a 3-month tour, and they arrived pretty much the same time you arrived at Cricket Australia.
Yeah, and so I arrived here, and Cricket Australia had done a rights deal with Channel 9 around its digital assets, where it's basically a joint venture. Cricket Australia controls the content and the product development. Channel 9 controls all the commercial inventory, mainly advertising and subscriptions at the moment. And that was a change of direction for Cricket Australia, who'd previously done deals with mainly with telcos. So Vodafone had owned the app that people used before, and then Vodafone had to go and sort out a few issues they were having around phone towers, so they got out of the sponsorship game for a while, and then that app just died because the contract hadn't really called for what was going to happen there. So Cricket Australia knew that they needed to invest in owning those properties just to sort of guard against the vagaries of the business world. But the thing that was really exciting for me when I sort of looked at the job was that they wanted to really matter. They wanted to have a significant media presence, and they understood to do that they needed to have authority with the public, and that they were going to have to report on all issues on the field.
So what did the cricket digital and the cricket news landscape look like a year ago when you came on board? Where were cricket fans going for content, and where was Cricket Australia and the Cricket Australia offering, I guess, from a digital point of view, where was that sitting in that landscape?
So there was Crick Info, ESPN's Crick Info, and then there was Daylight, and then there was a bunch of other people sort of battling for second place, and which I think you often find in the digital space. Cricket Australia would sometimes be up there in the 2, 3 amongst cricket websites, but compared to other sports sites, it wasn't relevant at all. And that was the other thing that really appealed to me in this job, that I looked at it and it felt like ESPN was winning through incumbency rather than through innovation.
So Crick Info initially was a site built out of India, and ESPN acquired it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, they acquired it, I think, sort of 10, 12 years ago. So It's been in the family. But it sits quite differently. Like, I think it sort of sits under ESPN International. So it doesn't, and you look at the site, it doesn't share many similarities with the other ESPN properties. And the main thing they did really early on was that they got all the historical cricket scorecards up, and they had a fantastic stats database before anyone else did, and they supported that with some pretty strong editorial.
I mean, and like baseball, cricket is a stats driven game, and people will want to know, they want to find out every single innings of Don Bradman. That's where they want to look for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. But it's interesting now, like that stuff's really been commoditized. There's a lot of people in the field who now can offer that. And so I looked at that and thought, for a sport that's tremendously popular across the world, if you look in sheer numbers of people who are passionate fans of a sport, it competes against just about anything outside of soccer. And, admittedly, they're only in 7 countries, but, if you just look at sheer weight of population. And I felt like compared to other sports, the market wasn't very competitive. If someone came along and said, we're thinking of setting up a soccer site, you're like, well, what niche are we going to get into there? Everything's covered. But cricket, I felt like, we're at Cricket Australia, we were going to have the video rights for anything in Australia, and we know how powerful video rights are around sport, but also just had the sense that there was a hunger in the market for something different. Because I knew at News that once we got to February 1 out of the summer, we just forgot about cricket and we went back to covering footy.
Yep.
And yet, all the surveys tell you that there's millions of Australians who love cricket. And so I sort of thought, well, okay, over the summer we can really activate video. But I've had this sense that there was a year-round proposition to be built there.
Yep.
And, and Cricket Info's out of India. They've got, I think, 2 or 3 journos based in Australia. Well, let's build a cricket property that's unashamedly from the Australian angle. I'm not talking about being biased necessarily, but just feeding the demands of the Australian cricket fan. And I thought, I just can't see, as long as you're not dumb about it, I can't see how this can't work.
So you've taken on the role, seen the big upside, seen the potential of cranking the content engine. We'd had similar success with the guys at the Sydney Thunder, just saying we want more page views and we want more people. We need more content, and sometimes it is as simple as that. So, it's not a one-man job. What were some of the first key hires and things you had to do to build out your team? What were some of the roles, and what was the team like for that Ashes series?
Yeah, so the main area I needed to hire in initially was the content area, because we had developed an app that I hadn't had any involvement in. I'd come in on the last month of it, so I can't take any credit for that. But they had about 2 full-time people looking after content, and we knew we needed to ramp that up. So now we've got 11. So I hired, I reckon, about 7 or 8 people in about the first month, hiring frenzy. And the most important one was who's going to be the head of content, because that sets the tone for everything else. And the thing I knew is that no one saw us as a content destination. So I knew that I needed someone who really got social and was a gun in that area. And the best guy I knew at social news, both, covering and the way he, both using social to cover news, but also the way he sold stuff, was a guy called Ben Wise, who was previously worked at radio station 3AW and then was working at Southern Cross or Stereo. Luckily he was a cricket fan, up for the challenge. And then the other thing I knew was I needed some authority. If we were going to write, if we're going to be taken seriously by the fans, I needed someone who could go toe-to-toe with Mel Conn and, the other big Australian journos. And so a guy called Andrew Ramsey had been the Australian cricket correspondent for 10 or 12 years and had sort of had a bit of a hiatus and gone into speech writing and stuff like that. And I knew his name. I'd actually commissioned him when I worked on cricket magazines, like in the early 2000s. And I got in touch with him and sort of like, you bored of that yet? How do you feel like going back on the road? And kind of, as long as I'm not on the road 12 months a year, yeah, I'm really up for it. And I think he's one of the elite cricket writers in the country. And so those are really the 2 key hires. Then you just fill around that with, the main thing is people who are not blinkered as to what skills being a journalist means. Definitely at News, there was this sense early on when I was there that doing videos or podcasts or anything else was going to be on top of their job. Whereas, we've hired just an amazing group of guys for whom cutting video, cutting audio, writing, doing a piece to camera is all just part of their skill set. And, obviously they've got strengths and weaknesses around that, but we need people who are just comfortable doing any of that at any time, because we can't be so precious to say we only have one presenter or we only have one writer.
So what was it like coming in and completely changing the focus of what CA had done from a content point of view previously? Because previously it would have been maybe a little bit more straight line and length, if we're going to use a cricketing term, of match reports and player video afterwards and stuff like that. But you changed the tack to actually engage the fans more, have a bit of backwards and forwards with the fans on platforms like Twitter and have different takes that you wouldn't expect to be seeing on Cricket Australia. One, how was that received both externally with the fans, but then also internally with management and things like that?
Yeah, to me, the litmus test was the first test of the Gabba. Australia is doing surprisingly well after our previous tour of England, and There's a bit of banter going on the wicket. The captain, Michael Clark, tells one of the Englishmen to get ready for a broken effing arm. Gets picked up on the pitch mics. Normally the TV broadcast turns that down, gets picked up. Obviously becomes a big talking point. So, we want to own the moment. That's our mantra. So we grab that, put that video out, make a big deal of it on the site, make a big deal of it on social. And, I thought if there's going to be pushback around what we're doing, this is where the rubber hits the road, because this is us highlighting the Australian captain not being a gracious statesman. And there's probably people who are uncomfortable with it, but I didn't get any official feedback around it. And, this is where sort of that stakeholder management really matters. That was such a massive story for us, did so well in traffic. You need to get that story out to say we're not just doing it so that, I can pat myself on the back and say what a great journalist am I. I'm doing it because the fans love it and they lap it up. And if we don't do it, other people will get in that space and we're just wasting our time. So, we've got to own those moments as much as we'll own the moments when the Australians are playing brilliantly and we'll celebrate that.
And so the fan feedback, again, it was a matter of putting that content out and they were loving it. Obviously, it's the strategy that Brian Sarabian still subscribes to with the Giants. Winning is a great strategy. So
nothing beats winning.
Nothing beats winning as a marketing strategy. So the Aussies are getting on top, and really it was a matter of how can we pile on? And the fans were quite willing to jump on board, and because it just grew from test to test. It was a bit of a juggernaut throughout the summer, wasn't it?
We had one we're winning, and two we had Mitch Johnson. The fast bowler was sort of, I think, his great redemption story. He had the handlebar Mo that was a throwback to the 70s, and he was bowling sort of in an aggressive way that we hadn't seen for a long time. So we just unashamedly rode the Mitch Johnson bandwagon. Winning was great, but Mitch was sort of probably took us to the next level. And the interesting thing we saw on social was, as we sort of, started trying different things. Like I remember at one stage during last summer, Brendan McCullum, the New Zealand captain, I think scored a 200 or something, and we kind of got on board a bit. And they were playing India, and so we sort of like, a bit of Tasman friendship here. We're sort of cheering him on over Twitter and on Facebook. And you saw some people saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" The Cricket Australia account. And before we even could kind of get on there and explain it, we'd find other fans going, "Oh, these guys are just interested in cricket. They're just interested in the great stories in cricket." And it was nice how quickly we had advocates already on platforms, that weren't, pseudonyms from us. It was just people who kind of got what we're trying to do there. And it sort of spoke to that thing earlier that I had this sense that there's cricket fans just hungry for content that hadn't been served that well.
So, you got hits coming along board with, great content, whether it be controversy, the menacing figure of Mitch Johnson steaming in and, being able to leverage that. And, anytime you put out another wicket, you put it out, it gets retweeted, it gets smashed and shared. I want to take you through one that was a misstep that you copped a bit of flack for around a tweet with Monty Panesar that was, said that it was racist and it was a bit off colour from a humour point of view. You want to take us through like what it was like sort of managing that and some of the repercussions of it?
Yeah. So, we just made it blue, we just put our hands up and said, you can go into all the backstory of, it's not what it appeared, but, at the end of the day, we made a mistake and we didn't shy away from that. But the hardest thing was that Adelaide Oval mobile reception is terrible. So trying to actually reach guys on the ground to sort of make sure everyone organisationally knew about it was really difficult. So in retrospect, I wish we had a satellite phone or something like that, because that would have made us been able to move a bit quicker. But
because the mechanics are useful, because they do happen. Sometimes you put it out and you go, this is got a good take, and you don't see the other meaning or how other people read it. And so it's gone out. Some people are going, oh, gee, that's a little bit, that's a bit off colour. What was some of the mechanics then? Who was driving the account? Was it a delete and apologise? What sort of happened there?
So, we pretty much as soon as it went out, we saw the negative reaction. So, as quickly, I felt like the comms internally needed to be done before we deleted it, because while our comms team doesn't run our digital channels, they're going to get all the inbound calls. So they need to know about it. As soon as they're in the loop, we deleted it and apologised. And then pretty much every media outlet in the world ran a story on it. It felt like so. And
it just shows the growth of cricket and how far it reaches. Right, so you're getting the Daily Mail and the Guardian and all that kind of stuff picking it up because Ashes. It's got the focus of the British press. The tabloid media is unforgiving over there,
who do like to whack Aussies, and so it was interesting. I reckon the biggest challenge for me, like I was, it was again sort of a litmus test for me dealing with the organisation, just how supportive the organisation was. Obviously not supportive of what we'd done, but just kind of accepting we were copying on the chin, and there was no sort of calling for anyone's heads. But then for my team, making sure they don't lose their nerve. This is really early on. We're about a month in, and I wanted them to be putting content there that was engaging with people, and that was a huge misstep. But you want to make sure you support your people too, learn from it, but support them, that they don't go back to that they're not second guessing themselves. That's a really hard thing, and so So the biggest thing that came out of that is we separated our Twitter accounts, and this sort of leads into the strategy we've enacted this summer, which we'll get to. But so we created a comms account that was the official voice of Cricket Australia, and then the existing account became cricket.com.au, and the bio spoke to that we were a digital media.
You were the content of Cricket Australia. So it was a little bit of a distancing to say, this isn't Michael Clark having a go, and because that's what a lot of people read it as, because Cricket Oz effectively was the team account when it started, right. And now it's effectively the content arm.
Yeah, and it's an interesting strategy. Like, I know not everyone sort of supported that, but I think if I'd had a longer time to run into last summer, I probably would have done that anyway, because we're not like the AFL where they're just the administrator. We've also got a team.
Yep.
So, we employ Cricket Australia both employs me and my team. They also employ the players. And so it's no doubt confusing early on, especially for the players, where what appears to be your employer's account is critiquing what you're doing. Like, I don't know if I'd love to wake up each morning and say I was having a look over my day the day before. I can see how that's confronting. And so I think giving the clarity around what each account's purpose is. Like the whole thing in digital is trying to make it simple for the user, right? At first glance, you get what this is, you get what it's trying to do. And I hope that's what we did through that. But, the thing, if I had my time over, the fact that it appeared like a knee-jerk reaction rather than a considered one.
Yep.
Of course, I'd rather that didn't happen. But, there was always going to be something that was going to come of coming in so late to the game. So we wear that when we move on, and
so that does bring us, because it sort of was the genesis of what you were thinking of, and it just accelerated a little bit, but to what it is now, and so last week you've launched 2 new sites, cricket.com.au, which is the main news content site for cricket, and then cricketaustralia.com.au. As a separate site for the administration of the game, how to play the game, everything that Cricket Australia does as an organising body, and really gives clarity to fans coming to go, what do I want content? I go here. What do I want to register my son to play cricket? I go there. And that's really that's part of the role that you're in. We're in Cricket Australia. You are serving that two purpose. Do you want to take us through around that decision and the new sites?
Yeah, so obviously I had an inkling, but you want to always validate that stuff. So I think actually we started in December last year. Like, I'd only been in the job a couple of months, where we started doing probably more research than I've ever done before, a digital project, where we went and spoke to all our key stakeholders, sponsors, Channel 9, internally, but most importantly fans. So we did a couple of focus groups, we did a survey, we looked at traffic, and we just kept getting this same thing we kept hearing through all the interviews was, what's cricket.com.au trying to be? I'm confused by that. I'm not sure what to expect there. Is it trying to be the governing body, or is it trying to be something that competes with Cricket Info?
And the thing is, at that time, it was doing all.
That's exactly right.
So you end up with these monstrosity menus of all the different options, because you have to have a link for the umpires, and you have to have a link for junior development. You have to have a link for all the different forms of cricket, and so. From a UX point of view, as a fan coming in, you go, "There's so many options. I'm spoiled for choice, and I can't find anything."
Like you do those, user research sessions where you go through jobs. You say, you want to find out information about this. How would you go about it? And we just had people sitting there baffled. So we knew and I just believe in simplicity where it can, and the trend towards mobile's actually great for that because.
You have to strip everything back to
it
work on mobile.
It focuses your thinking, and even more importantly, it focuses your designer's thinking, because designers tend to see an empty spot and figure that some more content should go there. And so once we'd had such overwhelming feedback, I thought, well, this seems really clear to me. And then the challenge was going to be the internal sell. People don't always like change. I'd only been my seat was barely warm, was this going to be moving too fast? But again, kind of to the credit of the organisation, because we had such, I guess, overwhelming research behind it, there wasn't even a second guess whether it was from the executive or from the board that, this is the way forward. And, the upside to the organisation is all those other great stories that might have appeared on cricket.com.au, but it was a news site. I've got this sort of belief, nothing should lead the site for more than 2 or 3 hours in summer. Turn it over, make sure it's fresh so people are driven back, all that sort of stuff. Meant that the lovely stories about the Impaja Cup or Movember or whatever just wouldn't get much life there. And so now there's a place that they can live for an extended period of time and to help tell those stories and not getting pushed down by the news cycle. So
take us through, you were talking about the research there, take us through, I guess, the UX, the user interface development and really the focus on mobile. I think you were saying last week at the launch, 70% of traffic from mobile. So it was obviously, that is the platform. You're fighting for everyone's pocket over summer. So you really took the approach of designing it from the mobile up. Now that we have you would know how many different size devices we have now because you would have had to design for them all. But
because we've done responsive design. So I think we've got 4 or 5 breakpoints on the. Well, it's 4, but maybe Apple's. New devices made it 5, and it was nice of Apple to give us a few hints around that because we launched about 2 weeks after the iPhones came out, or we had to submit about 2 weeks after. Particularly December, January, which are our biggest months, no one's sitting in front of a computer at work. So at News Corp, the weekday drove our traffic. Here it's much flatter. It's much more evening. If you look at the graph of our day, peak in the morning, does okay during the day, then a huge peak, 7 till 10, 7 till 11. And the interesting thing in that is that tablet's not really growing as a proportion. It's growing overall, but, it's not taking any share away from the others, but mobile is eating into desktop share fairly significantly. So we knew that we wanted really different sort of visual cues on the 2 different sites. We didn't, while they'll be part of a network, we didn't want them to feel the same. Speaking back to users, so we did a lot of look at the sites that we thought did that the best. Off the top of my head, the Guardian. We looked at the New York Times. Probably didn't take too much from that. You look at ESPN. You look at Manchester City. All the people that sort of people tick off. You even look at the Daily Mail. It looks horrible, but if you look at their traffic, they're doing something right, aren't they? And it's content really, but still, what can you learn from that? Like their right-hand rail is something that I think, it's really been really effective. So we did that, but we wanted that to really feel like an authoritative news site, and then the other one we wanted to feel more like a corporate site. So we looked at Coca-Cola, other large corporations that we thought did that community engagement piece really well, and we don't want to be a dry financial institution. We want to talk about us out in the community. And so, we looked at the best examples of that and were led by them. So
now I read a really interesting piece, and I'll share it with you. It was an interesting piece on ESPN and how everything in ESPN is grey. And Bill Simmons sort of with his whole issues around calling Roger Goodell a liar, and whether Bill Simmons is a journalist or whether he's just a guy on the TV and on podcasts.
Well, a member of the executive because he's now part of their management.
Yeah, and it was really about Gray and all the I guess deals that they've done with with leagues and things like that. So now you're you're in Cricket Australia reporting on cricket. Have it. How is that different? And what have you learned since then? I mean, when you were at News and you were looking at competing with the guys at the AFL website, you were like, oh, this can't work. Oh, you've got to be independent.
Hashtag Pravda.
Hashtag Pravda. I did suggest you should be using Mark Cuban's Expire app and going back and finding all those tweets where you were having a go at them. But so yeah, has your opinion changed or different point of view coming on this side of the fence now?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a difference between what you personally acknowledge, and I think the AFL media team really proved their worth when they were covering the Essendon drug scandal, which was a big internal issue that would have been really difficult for them. But when you're in a pitch battle day to day, you take your shots where you can. It's a challenge. Like it is anywhere. It's like when News, it's a challenge, I'm sure, for the general news guys on how to report on the hacking trial in the UK.
Yep.
It happens in places, but, for us, it's day to day. The funny thing is that I reckon, because I brought across guys who I worked with at Fox Sports before, but, the guys who worked at the Daily Mail and, other leading sites. I reckon we're actually probably better journalists here than we were necessarily at the other places because we absolutely live by the give right of reply, double check your facts. If just one outlet's reporting it, it's not enough. Whereas at News, one outlet's reporting it, just go with report say, and you can always walk it back from there. And, it was all about just sort of trying to compete in that space with so many other people. So, sometimes here, if something happens on the field, I'm absolutely on the guys. We've got to be first. We've got no excuses not to have the first video up, that sort of thing. But if it's other areas around accusations of impropriety, I'd rather us be right than first. And so that's the biggest change.
I'll share the link, but that was pretty much the article around ESPN that, if Bill Simmons is a journalist, he has to be factually correct and be able to back up calling Roger Goodell a liar rather than just saying it. Yeah. Even though 98% of his audience go, he's just like us, we're in a bar, we're drinking and it's funny. Unfortunately, because he's got the masthead of ESPN there, it still has that journalistic integrity. So, I mean, from your journalistic background, you're almost scoring yourselves at a higher standard because you're not with a news organisation.
It's weird. And, and the sort of, I think if you come back to sort of what the fans really care about, the stuff that journalists love getting into, which is, the machinations of the boardroom and stuff like that, which is the area where it is really hard to stand up often because it's someone's source. And, if you don't have that person's source, you can't verify it. Even at News, that stuff didn't rate like talking about trades or whatever. If only there was a trade period in cricket, we could really go to town. But, where I think we'll live and die in terms of success is how well we cover the cricket on the field. We'll never shy away from, we want to cover all the stories because I want fans to feel like they get the whole story when they come to us. But, in terms of what I really mark our guys on, if something like, there was a controversy around Steve Smith's catch, was it legal or not because he'd moved while the bowler was bowling? We should absolutely be all over that and we should be faster and we should be better than everyone else. And I think we were in that case. But when it's sort of stuff behind closed doors, we may not necessarily be the first, but I'm okay with that as long as we're right when we cover it.
Because, I mean, again, going back to the fact that you are in charge of a team, the last thing you want to do is break your trust with that team. It's the same as, with all the guys in Clubland, whether it be AFL, NRL, Big Bash, that kind of thing. When you're dealing with your players, you want to make sure that you're not going to break their trust, whether it's, bringing an iPhone in to take a photo in the locker room or quoting them off the record, for the oh, yeah, we'll get page views if we put that up. But you lose the trust of the players in the content you're producing. You can just kiss that content or that player goodbye.
And the biggest thing that I've brought in here is that, I've said to the comms team, just treat us like the biggest cricket website in Australia. So, that means we get some exclusives the same way that Herald Sun gets some cricket exclusives and other media outlets do. But I don't want the team announcement ahead of any other media outlet because that conflicts my guys too much. It starts putting that second thought in their mind of, what's my actual role here? I just want them to be great sports reporters. So we get the team announcement at the same time as every other media outlet. It might appear we're quicker because I think we're better, but we might get some exclusive stuff ahead of other people because we ask the question because we've got 11 journos, so we ask more questions. But, if I was sitting outside, I would think we're being hand-fed stuff, and I can't do much about the perception, but just to give the clarity to my journos, I just say, no, so when we're on the road, we don't wear Cricket Australia polos, we wear cricket.com.au polos, and all this stuff that may not seem materially important, but is actually really important for both for dealing with the team so that they don't think my guys are, a part of their outlet and cheerleading. We don't travel with the bus when we're overseas. We have our own transport. But we'll be there longer. We get there when the team arrives. And a lot of other news outlets can't afford to send anyone until the test match starts. So we might get a few extra things because we're there a week beforehand.
Yeah. And the fact that you're seeing a lot of your content from a video point of view getting repurposed on TV networks and stuff like that because they're not sending
Fox
people.
Sports should give us a license fee. But it's actually what better publicity can you get than having your watermark all over things? And, Keith Olbermann picked up the thing with Aaron Finch nearly getting burnt by the pyrotechnics last week. And, he picked up the cricket.com.au. He could have picked up the Channel 9 one or anything. But, it's nice that, we're either easily to find or, the fact that we've clearly had a good package that, awesome. However many million people on ESPN2 saw cricket.com.au.
I just wanted to take us through the partnership for these new websites, the partnership between Nine being the TV broadcaster and I guess the commercialization partner for the network and Accenture being the technology guys sort of building it together. Take us through that process of how it worked, what your team has done to get these sites up and how the partnerships work together.
Yeah, so I'll start with Nine, and I couldn't recommend more highly because there's two great advantages for your digital rights partner being also your broadcast partner. One, for sales. Everyone wants to sell across multi-channel now, so they can do a deal with Commonwealth Bank around the viewers' verdict, when people vote on TV, and they own it on the digital channels, and it's on our digital channels rather than if you watch other TV networks. And they've both got pushing to the official league site, but they're also pushing to their own channels. And, as a user, you kind of like, well, where do I go for this information? Yep. We're sending everyone to the one destination, which I think is extraordinarily powerful. The other area, that sort of strength around that is the ability to share content. You don't have to do stuff twice. So if they do a really nice package for the cricket show, it appears on channels. If we get exclusive vision with the players, we share it with them. So, you're really sort of making the most of your resources in that way. Obviously NFL and people like that have their own TV channel. So that's a whole different kettle of fish. We work with them, across all things, when we're redesigning it, they had a lot of input into like our ad units because they own it obviously through MI9. They've got a big network there, so they want to be able to sell across that network. So of course, all our ad units should be in the same place so they can sell across that network. We work closely with them around helping our sponsors leverage on our platforms. Again, because they've been the broadcaster for however many years it is
since
now.
TV was pretty much invented in cricket almost.
1977, so it was the important year. That they're really used to working with our partners. They've got strong relationships there. So it just works so well. And I feel like there's just not an inherent kind of conflict because, say you're with a telco, the telco's really going to make money when people buy handsets. They're going to make some money through advertising other things. But so there's just their business model isn't necessarily about people engaging with your content in that purity. There's something else there, whereas
they are trying to shift. I mean, they are trying to shift that because the whole handset and that market is not a growing market.
Yeah, but I don't know if you look through their strategy. I think it still seems confused. Whereas for us, it's just a matter of we want people watching cricket, and because our partner's Nine, I don't care if people watch it on TV. because I know they'll come to us to vote, to see a replay, whatever. And for 9, they don't care about that either because they're making money either way they go. So I think that's really great. So for Accenture, when I came in, we had a lot of small vendors. Because it was probably spoke to where we'd been in terms of our ambitions and our budgets before. Those guys tried hard, but we had a lot of sort of technical issues.
But it was fragmented because you had a different web guy, a different app guy, someone else doing some social apps.
So something would fall over, and there would just be 4 blokes in a room pointing at each other.
Yep.
And so I knew I wanted to change that, and as much as I could, consolidate it. Accenture was already doing our video streaming, and they'd been really impressive with that. But we went to tender. We asked people to come in and pitch. We offered people the opportunity to become a partner, so that they could talk about it, because that's our business, is selling our logo for people to associate with them. And so Accenture are really keen to be able to talk about that. So they've come on board as a partner for the next 4 years. For that, they do all our web and app development. They do our live streaming. And then there's just got so much capability in other areas around data and analytics, things like that I think it will expand into even more areas. But the way it sort of basically works, my product team has product owners and the UX and design part of it. Then we work with Accenture, who bring the developers, the technology, that side of things. We've just gone through a pretty frantic, 4 or 5 month development of the 2 new sites, refresh of the app. And we went to I was going to say neutral space, but a new space that was just for this project, and it was sort of half CA, half Accenture, broken up into little modules depending on what stream they were working in. And if you walked in that room, you would be hard-pressed to tell who was CA and who was Accenture. It was an amazing environment, and everyone working long hours without a second thought. But, just the sort of harmony of that team. And, I worked briefly on the AFL website and, trying to deal with the huge sort of different stakeholders in that. I know how hard that was. Even at news, it was hard sometimes to get sort of everyone on the same page. But this one, I couldn't speak more highly of how well we've worked with Accenture on that. And I think the quality that they brought really, shows you, I guess, we're dealing with a tier 1 firm, just in terms of they don't just try and find a patch for something. They fix it at its heart, and they bring guys with just a lot of experience that, maybe smaller firms just can't afford to have those guys, whereas we can afford to have them in for a week, and then they can go back to other jobs.
So you were talking about last week at the launch that you've been using, so it's built on Sitecore.
Yeah.
And you've been using Agile and doing sprints around to get this out the door.
Yeah.
And the plan is, so for people who don't do Agile as a management methodology, it's the whole idea is continuous improvement. So you've still got a stack of features that you're sitting there in the list that you've stack ranked for everybody, and you're going to continually roll these things out throughout the summer?
Yeah, so I mean, the best thing about Agile is it gives you the greatest chance possible of hitting your launch date. The worst thing is the last month, where I felt like I just sat in a succession of meetings agreeing to take features out. So
it's just gun to the head to the client, say, pick which ones you don't want and we'll deliver.
Yeah.
That's the best bit of Agile as a former developer. But it does. It gets you to deliver stuff, and it makes, as a customer, it makes you put a really strong focus on, do I really, really need that?
Yeah, no, I'm a devotee of Agile for all of those reasons. So, and then the other thing is, like, at 10 of 2 weeks, you have to deliver something that works. So, it really puts the focus on fixing bugs in the run and things like that. So, we've got, obviously we, found a heap of small bugs. It's inevitable when we launched, so we'll be fixing them. But then we've got a bunch of features that we'll pretty much do development in 2 week sprints up until the World Cup. That's sort of the line in the sand we've drawn there. We hope we'll be in a pretty good space by then. We'll then take that time to step back and actually do some analysis on how people are using it. Are they using it in the way we expect? And start to do our planning for our big sort of winter development sprint again. So for the 3 months or whatever after that, I imagine we'll just be in sort of caretaking sort of mode from support mode. And then we'll again sort of go again for new features for next year, which is where we'll start to probably try and move the needle a bit around the commercials. It's nice to have a really popular site, but we'll have a look this summer and see, is it generating the income that our partners need.
So you mentioned there the Cricket World Cup. I went past the countdown clock. It's 94 days as of this morning. So that's it's going to be different for you guys because you won't have the same rights you usually do around all things cricket.
It's enormously painful for all our marketing.
Yeah, so
you have to keep putting an asterisk on it.
Yeah, so the Cricket World Cup will be in Australia and in New Zealand, but you won't have video rights. So you'll be just covering it as a pure cricket news site.
That's right, yeah, because it's an International Cricket Council event. So it's sort of like the ISC or FIFA coming in for the World Cup. So they've sold the rights to Fox Sports as part of Fox Sports is sort of the main broadcast, and then Channel 9 will be doing the Australian games because of anti-siphoning laws. Plus, they'll rate their pants off. So, yeah, it would be interesting. We'll be thrown back into sort of just being one of the pack, which we've experienced when Australia tours away. We don't have any more rights than anyone else. That's where you haven't had to resort to stick figures like you did in with News Corp. Do you want to quickly just go back to that around the strange nature of cricket and when digital rights and image rights go wrong? So the thing I didn't appreciate when I came into cricket was just how fragmented the rights deals are. So the way it works is the home team has all the rights. So particularly with India, the BCCI is a very powerful organisation there, and they really strongly believe that they should own all the images that come out of a game and how people use them. And so when I was at News, we weren't allowed to send our own. Well, I think that maybe we could have, but like the accreditation agreement would have been really restrictive of how we used the photos, and so we didn't want to allow that example to be set. So the BCCI does release photos, but you have to basically sort of, they're really restrictive in how you use them. So at News, we decided, well, if they're not going to accredit it the way we agree, we're going to create our own photos. So we're using like little figurines from the old Test match game.
Yep.
I think we might have cut out the heads of the players and stuck them on them and things like that, which was hilarious for about 2 days. And then the reports get pushed to the back of the paper because you can't do a nice 2-page spread if you don't have decent photos. And, it just hurts the game in the long run, I think, that kind of standing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the thing is with cricket, I was talking to the guys from Accenture around, where the rights, and your rights are in Australia, and that's the opportunity you've got because they're divvied up, outside Australia with all the different bodies. Yeah,
that's right. And and sort of we're, an interesting position where, Fox Sports are kind of a partner, even though they don't buy any rights from Cricket Australia. We, as an organisation, obviously want them to continue to invest in cricket so cricket fans can watch it live.
Yeah.
Back in Australia, that's really important. But, this is when my team's thrown into that situation of having to sort of not be a rights holder anymore, that's when the size of the team really helps. Because you can just throw effort at, we will do, use fair use news reporting like Fox Sports does during the summer here. Yep. But it means we can turn around something pretty quickly because we can throw some bodies at it to get that stuff up. But, you have to be really careful. We don't want to ever impinge on someone's rights there, so we don't take the piss with the amount of videos we do or anything like that. But again, we just sort of try and provide a service to our fans so when they wake up in the morning from an overnight test, they can see a minute 30 wrap of the day's play.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Hopefully we see more videos and entertaining stuff from cricket.com.au and not just players getting their face burnt off from pyrotechnics around the boundary. I'll share a link to the Aaron Finch video from earlier in the week that was on Keith Albert.
Yeah, you can find it. It was a really well-written piece from Keith. He referenced the Ashes. He referenced Kentucky Fried Chicken as a sponsor. Did a well job. Thanks for having me on, Sean. It was a real pleasure.
Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.
Thanks again to Finn Bradshaw from Cricket Australia. You can follow Finn on Twitter, Finn_Bradshaw on Twitter. What are your thoughts on the discussion we were having around leagues and effectively teams reporting on their own team and the balance of fairness? Do you agree with Finn now that he has jumped on the other side of the fence? He's working for Cricket Australia in his own Pravda and there's a few tweets in the show notes to sort of go back in history and see how he was antagonising the people at AFL Media, and now he's effectively performing the same role at Cricket Australia. Do you think you have to hold yourself to a higher regard to against that, to not be seen as just playing for the team, playing for the league? It is a balancing role, especially in that league and organising bodies, playing in the space of being seen as a news organisation. The ESPN article we discussed around the grey area around ESPN is in the show notes as well. You can get that at sportsgeekhq.com/68. One final thing as I wrap up this episode, because it was a bit of a longer interview with Finn, I am planning a trip prior to SEAT. So SEAT is on in July 19 to 21 in San Francisco. You know I'll be there, and been speaking to Christine Stoffel about some of the plans for the conference. It will be a cracker. I expect to see a lot of you there. But people who are listening in Australia, I'm planning a pre-SEAT conference trip, taking in towns such as Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco before that. So please get in touch with me. Email me, Sean@sportsgeekhq.com. Not going to take everybody. It's not going to be a large group. But if you're interested, I'm taking registrations of interest and starting to plan that out. Social media post of the week is going to the NBA and really out to Dirk Nowitzki, becoming the 9th highest point scorer in the NBA, and includes footage from 13th of January 2010 when I saw Dirk Nowitzki score his 20,000 NBA point. Discussed that on episode 63 with Brad Main. That clock is ticking to tell me to get out of the podcast, let you get back on with your day, and to get cracking in all things sports digital. You can get the links to this show at sportsgeekhq.com/68. And don't forget, you can connect with guests like Finn and all the guests, 93 in total, that have been on the podcast. If you're in Melbourne, I'll be at the Entrepreneur Club on November 25 at the Honey Bar. I'll have a link in the show notes for that, and I'll be discussing how I built Sports Geek over the last 5 years, back to when I was just a plain old geek. So, yeah, if you can come along to that, it should be a good night. Going to have a fair few in attendance at the Honey Bar on November 25. Stay listening for the sounds of the game after the credits from the NRL Facebook page. The Kiwi team coming out winners in the Four Nations tournaments against the Australian Kangaroos. And this is the Kiwi boys performing the haka to fans at Westpac Stadium after winning the Four Nations. Congrats to them. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek HQ. You've been listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.
Check out which teams work with Sports Geek at sportsgeekhq.com/clients. Find all Sports Geek podcasts at sportsgeekhq.com/SGP. Send in your sounds of the game. Email Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.